Have you ever paused mid-thought and wondered why everything that once brought you joy suddenly feels distant? Why the things that used to excite you now barely stir a ripple inside your chest? Why conversations feel hollow, routines feel meaningless, and even the idea of happiness feels like something happening far away to someone else? There is a strange, unsettling emptiness that comes long before people realize they are awakening. A kind of spiritual numbness that makes the world look familiar but feel foreign, as if life is happening behind a glass window, and you are merely watching instead of living. Maybe you've asked yourself quietly, what's wrong with me? Why does nothing move me anymore? Why does everything feel muted, flat, stripped of color? Why do I feel disconnected from people, from activities, from myself? It is a silent, private fear, the fear that perhaps you are losing yourself. But what if the truth is something far different, far deeper? What if the emptiness you feel is not a collapse, but a calling? What if the loss of joy is not a failure, but a message from the soul? A quiet whisper that the life you built no longer fits who you are becoming. Sensitive, self-aware souls often reach this strange threshold long before others. The world that once comforted you begins to feel too loud, too heavy, too shallow. Conversations become predictable. Responsibilities become robotic. Even your dreams no longer carry the same spark. You look around and notice that nothing outside of you seems capable of filling the silent space opening within. And so you assume something is wrong, but emptiness is not the absence of meaning. It is the clearing of meaning that no longer resonates. It is the soul withdrawing its energy from what is false, from what is outdated, from what has served its purpose, but can no longer nourish your inner world. Emptiness is not a punishment. It is preparation. It is the mind loosening its grip on who you once were. So the soul can guide you toward who you are meant to become. This numbness, this disconnection, this lack of joy, it appears when the old self has died, but the new self has not yet emerged. It is the quiet space between chapters, the winter before the spring, the stillness before the blooming. And though it feels frightening to feel so little, so suddenly, there is a deeper intelligence beneath it, one asking you to pay attention. What if your emptiness is not a void at all, but a doorway? What if the feeling that nothing matters is actually the beginning of discovering what truly does? What if your soul is not disconnected from life, but from the version of life that no longer aligns with your truth? The emptiness you fear may be the very space your spirit needs in order to grow. And this is where your journey begins, not in joy, but in the profound, unsettling silence that comes when the soul is preparing to wake. There comes a moment in every awakening when the identity you once carried quietly, unconsciously, faithfully begins to fall apart. Not with noise, not with panic, but with a strange, subtle unraveling. You wake up one day and realize that the version of yourself you've been living as no longer feels like you. The goals you chased feel distant. The habits you kept feel heavy. The relationships you maintained out of routine suddenly feel hollow. This collapse is not dramatic on the outside, but internally, it feels like the ground beneath you is shifting. When your old identity dissolves, joy dissolves with it. Not because joy is gone forever, but because the old version of you, the one who found joy in certain things, no longer exists in the same way. You can't feel joy the same because you are not the same. What once lit you up no longer reaches the depth you've grown into. This can feel frightening, confusing, even humiliating. You ask yourself, why can't I enjoy the things I used to? Why don't I recognize myself anymore? Why does life feel like a script I can no longer act in? But this collapse is not destruction, it is liberation. The identity you built throughout your life was shaped by expectations, by survival, by imitation. You learned what to pursue based on society, not your soul. You learned who to be based on approval, not authenticity. And as your awareness expands, these old layers begin to fall away like cracked paint from a wall that is ready to be repainted. The soul cannot inhabit a false identity, so it gently, but steadily, disconnects from anything built on fear, conformity, or unconsciousness. This is why you feel empty. Your old identity has run out of fuel. Your old way of living has expired. Your old self is dissolving. And your new self has not yet arrived. This in-between state is what philosophers call the void, and what mystics call the dark night of the soul. It is the emptiness that precedes truth, the stillness that precedes clarity, the quiet that precedes rebirth. And although it feels like loss, it is actually space. space being created inside you. Space that once belonged to patterns you no longer resonate with. Space that once held joys that no longer nourish who you are becoming. When the old self collapses, your system withdraws energy from everything that kept that self alive: old hobbies, old desires, old roles, old emotional habits. So nothing feels joyful. Nothing feels meaningful. Nothing feels like you, but this is not depression, it is transition. A shedding. A dissolving, a quiet undoing so gentle, so profound, that the world around you begins to lose its flavor as you begin to shed the one who used to taste it. Your soul is not disconnected from life. It is disconnected from the identity you have outgrown. And soon, as the old layers fall away, something new will begin to emerge, a self that feels real, aligned, awake. But for now, the emptiness is simply the echo of everything you can no longer pretend to be. There is a kind of tiredness that sleep cannot fix. A heaviness that settles not in the body, but in the spirit. It is the exhaustion that comes from feeling too much for too long, from carrying emotions that were never yours to hold, from giving energy to a world that constantly pulls more than it returns. Sensitive, self-aware souls often reach a point where life feels muted, not because they are numb, but because they are drained. The emptiness you feel is not a void, it is fatigue. Ancient, quiet, unspoken fatigue. Have you noticed how even small tasks feel overwhelming? How conversations feel like work instead of connection? How joy feels too distant to grasp, too faint to trust? How your mind wants to care, but your heart simply cannot rise to meet it. This is the emotional exhaustion of the spirit, the burnout of a soul that has lived in survival mode for too long. The world around you has been too loud, too demanding, too relentless. You have carried empathy like a responsibility, sensitivity like a burden, awareness like a constant whisper you cannot turn off. Eventually, the system shuts down, not to punish you, but to protect you. When the soul becomes exhausted, it withdraws its energy from everything unnecessary. Not because it doesn't care, but because it cannot afford the cost. Not because you've lost interest, but because you've lost capacity. This is why nothing brings joy anymore. It is not that joy is gone. It is that you have been living with emotional circuits overloaded for so long that your spirit has entered a kind of emergency conservation mode. Like a computer running too many programs at once, you freeze, slow down, and dim your internal lights to prevent collapse. And society never taught you to recognize this. It told you to be productive, to stay busy, to keep giving, to push through. But the soul does not respond to pressure. It responds to presence. The emptiness you feel is your system trying to reset. Your spirit saying, I cannot absorb any more noise. Your inner world whispering, I need silence, I need stillness, I need space. This exhaustion is often mistaken for a lack of gratitude or a lack of passion. But in truth, it is the sign of someone who has felt deeply for far too long without replenishment. Someone who has endured waves of emotion without anchoring. Someone who has cared for the world more than they have cared for themselves. And here is the quiet truth. You were not designed to feel everything. You were not designed to heal everyone. You were not designed to carry the emotional weight of every moment, every person, every expectation. Your emptiness is the soul's way of pulling the plug on emotional overconsumption. It is the natural response to burnout. A spiritual shutdown meant to protect you from breaking entirely. You are not broken, you are depleted. In this phase, life feels disconnected, not because you are failing, but because your spirit is resting. Your numbness is not the absence of emotion. It is the pause required to feel again someday. The exhaustion is temporary, but it is necessary. Your soul is not abandoning you. It is trying to gather itself back together. There is a phase in awakening so quiet and so misunderstood that most people mistake it for something going terribly wrong. It is the phase where nothing touches you the way it used to, where joy feels distant, where sadness feels muted, where even your own thoughts sound like echoes rather than truths. This is the numbness before transformation, the mysterious stillness that arrives. When your soul is preparing to shift from one level of being to another, it feels strange, doesn't it, to watch life from the outside? To move through your days as if you're wearing a body that no longer feels like home. To live in a world that looks the same but no longer feels the same. to sense a change coming without having any idea what it is. This numbness is not emptiness, it is suspension. A pause, a sacred interval, a spiritual winter where everything inside you grows silent so something new can grow without interruption. Life has quieted your inner world so the noise of your old patterns cannot interfere with your evolution. In every spiritual tradition, this phase appears before transformation. The mystics call it the void. The Buddhists call it emptiness. Alan Watts described it as the moment when the meaning you once relied upon dissolves so deeper meaning can be revealed. You are not lost, you are dissolving. You are not broken, you are becoming spacious. You are not numb, you are being rewired. During this phase, your soul retreats from the outer world. It withdraws its emotional attachments so it can reevaluate who you are beneath them. What used to excite you stops working because it was tied to an old version of you, a version your spirit has outgrown. What used to matter loses weight because it was connected to identities you are now releasing. Think of it like this. A caterpillar does not transform while crawling. It stops. It dissolves. It becomes unrecognizable even to itself before it becomes anything new. That dissolving is what you are feeling now. The numbness is not a dead end. It is a cocoon, a space suspended between who you were and who you are becoming. The soul creates this stillness intentionally. When joy disappears, it is because you are being guided away from what no longer aligns with your higher self. When meaning evaporates, it is because your old meaning was too small for the truth that wants to emerge. When everything feels flat, it is because your inner landscape is clearing itself for a deeper, more authentic experience of life. This phase is not meant to feel good. It is meant to be honest, raw, quiet, unavoidable. It forces you to face yourself without distractions. It forces you to slow down. It forces you to notice what within you is dying and what within you is quietly trying to be born. So if you feel numb, disconnected, or suspended in nothingness, know this: you are not falling apart. You are falling inward. And from that inward falling will rise a self more aligned, more awake, and more real than anything you have known before. There is a moment in every spiritual journey when disconnection becomes inevitable. Not because you failed, not because you're broken, but because the life you've been living can no longer carry the truth of who you are becoming. You feel it in subtle ways at first. Conversations that once energized you now drain you. Environment that once felt normal now feel misaligned. People you once felt close to now feel impossibly far. You look around and sense that everything is the same, yet you no longer belong to it in the same way. This disconnection is not an accident. It is an invitation, a gentle pulling away from the external world so that you can begin noticing the parts of yourself you've overlooked. The soul withdraws its emotional engagement, not to punish you, but to create the silence required for your next expansion. In spiritual terms, this is what some call the sacred retreat, the inner pulling back before a deeper reconnection can occur. Have you ever felt like you're floating slightly outside of your own life? Like you're watching yourself play roles you've outgrown? Like everything feels too familiar to be exciting, yet too different to be comfortable? This is the soul stepping back from the life you built around your old self. Disconnection becomes the bridge between identities where the old relationship, routines, and joys no longer resonate, but the new ones have not yet arrived. It feels like emptiness, but it is actually inner rearrangement. Imagine taking apart the foundation of a house before building a new one. During that process, everything looks unstable, chaotic, empty, but that emptiness is necessary. It creates space for something stronger, something more aligned, something real. This phase is similar. You feel disconnected because your soul is quietly detaching from what old versions of you, outdated relationships, limiting beliefs, draining responsibilities, unconscious patterns, emotional roles you no longer belong to. You feel disconnected from everything because the things you were once connected to no longer support your evolution. Disconnection always precedes reconnection, but the reconnection that follows is different, deeper, calmer, more meaningful. It is not driven by habit or fear or loneliness. It is driven by authenticity. You begin attracting people whose energy matches your new vibration. You find joy in different places. Not loud joy, but subtle, real joy. You develop interests that reflect your inner world, not your old identity. You feel more at home in your own presence than in any crowd. This is why spiritual disconnection is sacred. It removes the noise so the truth can finally be heard. It dissolves the outdated so the essential can emerge. It breaks the illusion so the real connection can form. And one day, without forcing anything, you feel life again. Not the life you once lived, but the life you were meant to live. Not the joy you once chased, but the joy that quietly grows from alignment. So if you feel disconnected from everything, know this. You are not losing connection. You are preparing for a truer one, a deeper one. A soul-level reconnection that only arrives after the old has been released. Your disconnection is not an ending. It is the pathway home, and then slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, something begins to change. Not outside you, nothing external has shifted, but within you, in the vast quiet space the emptiness created. It begins as a faint stirring, a soft awareness that perhaps the numbness was not the end of your joy, but the clearing required for a new kind of joy to emerge. This is the beginning of rebuilding meaning, not from habits, not from old identities, not from the expectations that shaped your past, but from the deepest, most honest layers of your being. Meaning does not rush back. It returns like dawn. Quietly, gently, gradually. You start to notice small things again, the way sunlight falls on your floor, the sound of your own breath, tenderness of a moment with no pressure on it, the comfort of your own presence when no one else is around. These moments don't explode with joy, they whisper with truth. For the first time in a long time, you sense that you don't need to chase meaning. You don't need to manufacture excitement. You don't need to force yourself into old hobbies or old patterns to feel alive. Meaning begins to rebuild itself not through effort, but through alignment. You stop trying to resurrect your old self and start allowing your new self to breathe. You begin to realize that the emptiness was clearing away joy that wasn't yours, the surface-level happiness you performed. The role you played to fit in, the goals you pursued because you thought you should, not because your soul was truly calling for them. You grieve these things, but the grief feels clean, honest, necessary. The space left behind becomes fertile ground for something more authentic. Slowly, you discover new interests, or rediscover forgotten ones. But this time you approach them differently, not to distract yourself, not to prove yourself, not to escape yourself. You approach them because your soul resonates with them. Your actions are no longer fueled by anxiety or obligation, but by quiet curiosity. Relationships change too. You feel a pull toward people who bring peace instead of chaos, who listen instead of dominate, who see you instead of need you. The connections that return to your life now are not based on identity, performance, or convenience. They are based on energy, and you no longer apologize for wanting depth. Life becomes simpler, not boring, simpler. More truthful, more spacious, more aligned. You begin building a life that matches your inner world, not the one society prepared for you, and meaning starts to flow again. This time from the inside out. You no longer try to feel joy. You allow joy to arise naturally from presence, from authenticity, from a life that finally reflects who you are becoming. The emptiness didn't take your joy away. It took away the layers that kept you from feeling true joy. And now, as you rebuild meaning from within, you begin to understand something profound. The joy returning to your life will not be loud, dramatic, or forced. It will be real, quiet, and deeply yours, arising from the truth you've finally grown into. This is how the soul heals, not by filling the emptiness, but by transforming it into a new beginning. And now, as you stand at the quiet edge of this inner journey, something within you begins to settle. The emptiness that once frightened you no longer feels like an enemy. It feels like a space, a spaciousness that was always meant to appear, a clearing created by your soul so you could finally see yourself without the noise, the expectations, the endless striving that once defined your life. What you once mistook for numbness now feels like stillness. What you once called disconnection now feels like truth, revealing itself in its simplest form. You begin to understand that this phase of your life was not a collapse, it was a returning to presence, a returning to clarity, a returning to the quiet wisdom hidden beneath all your ideas of who you were supposed to be. For so long, you tried to find joy in the world by chasing what the world told you to chase. You tried to feel alive by feeding the identity you had outgrown. You tried to fill your inner emptiness with outer stimulation. But joy built from the outside is always temporary. meaning built from roles, is always fragile. And a life built on expectations eventually cracks under its own weight. So the soul did what the soul always does when you drift too far from yourself. It withdrew. It dimmed your interest in what wasn't real. It emptied your attachment to what wasn't aligned. It silenced your emotional responses so you could hear something quieter, the truth beneath everything. And though it felt like losing yourself, it was actually the beginning of finding yourself again. You have walked through the void. You have tasted the emptiness. You have carried the numbness with fear, confusion, and quiet resilience. And through it all, something inside you has been shifting. Slowly, gently, almost invisibly. You are no longer who you were before this began. You are softer now, but not fragile. You are quieter, but more aware. You are emptier, but only of what no longer belongs inside you. And from this emptiness, something new is emerging. A deeper sense of meaning. A more authentic way of living. A connection not built from habit or fear, but from truth. This is the strange paradox of awakening. You lose joy, so you can rediscover a truer joy. You lose identity, so you can reclaim your real self. You lose connection, so you can connect from a deeper place. You lose meaning, so you can build a meaning that actually aligns with who you are becoming. The emptiness was not your end, it was your turning point. It was the winter before the spring, the silence before the insight, the pause before the expansion. And now, as you leave this phase behind, remember this: your soul never disconnected from life. It disconnected from the version of life that was too small for you. And soon, gently, naturally, without forcing, joy will return. Not the old joy, but a quiet, authentic joy that grows from alignment, presence, and truth. You are not falling apart. You are being remade.